That. All right, everybody, good morning. We appreciate you joining us this morning. I know this webinar scheduled at 8:30 Eastern for our folks on the West Coast. Must be really early for you guys. So we really do appreciate it. And you'll know the reason why it's been so early. We have a very special guest who will be presenting today. But before we get to our distinguished speaker, just a a couple of housekeeping items. As always, the CMBS Conference 2025 is upcoming. It's May 27th to the 29th in Fredericton. And the theme is Innovations in Health, Improving Patient Outcomes Through Sustainable Design and Appropriate Adoption. So once again, this is sort of our flagship conference of the year. The best of all across the country do come. So please, take your time and see if you can come to our conference in Fredericton of this year as well. This webinar, so moving to the webinar now, it really highlights things that were published in a memoir. It was just published in English in 2019 and in French in 2024 by the University of Ottawa Press. Among the lessons learned will be several discussions. The discussion on the imposter syndrome, how to decide what fights to take on, how to get visibility in a male-dominated committee, and there will also be a short presentation on the Montreal massacre at Ecole Polytechnique and what actions were taken to improve the participation of women in the engineering profession. And as always, the webinar will end with a Q&A. Once again, throughout the webinar, we accept typed questions and comments submitted online through our Q&A feature. Please do utilize the Q&A and try to avoid the chat if possible, of course. There won't be any verbal questions, and our presenter will be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. And again, this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel after the webinar is completed. And at this time, I will introduce Dr. Frize. Dr. Frize is, I guess, really, she needs no introduction, and this introduction could take the extent of the webinar itself. But how I was able to look at her achievements really is through her 40-year career. Dr. Frize has been at the forefront of her field in biomedical engineering, while emerging as the preeminent advocate for the advancement of women in the profession. To recognize her work in both of these areas, she has been presented with 5 honorary doctorates from Canadian universities. She's a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and of Engineers Canada, and is an officer of the Order of Canada, which is the country's highest civilian honor. She's the first woman to graduate from the University of Ottawa with a Bachelor of Engineering, with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, which was the beginning of a career spent leading the way in both biomedical engineering and participation of women in the profession. In 1989, Dr. Frize became the first holder of the Northern Telecom through the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council Chair for the promotion of women in engineering in Canada. She has more than 250 peer-reviewed publications on the subjects of clinical decision support system, medical imaging, biomedical instrumentation, and ethics. She was issued a patent in 1987. Between 1990 and 2000, she worked in Bangladesh, Haiti, and Morocco, helping these countries manage their medical devices. And that's just page 1 of my multi-page introduction, but I will leave it there. So Dr. Frize, we're very, very excited to have you. And the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, sometimes I wonder, is that me they're talking about, But I really want to thank CMBEC and especially Marie-Ange Janvier for organizing this webinar, because I'm talking to my friends, to my colleagues in the field that I loved for over 40 years. So that's very close to my heart. So thank you very much for doing that. Also, I want to thank Lara Mainville, the press of the University of Ottawa, who has believed in my project and has really published my book in English. And she and Mireille Pichet have organized wonderful launches in September at the University of Ottawa in French in September, and also in September, the end of September, in Toronto, University of Toronto, with Marta XJD and also the Toronto person who really helped to organize that particular meeting. So it was amazing for me to meet old students who have graduated a long time ago and old friends that I worked with in Moncton and elsewhere. So they were wonderful events. So today I want to share with you why I wrote this memoir, because I think it could help young men and young women if they face similar barriers and obstacles that I've had in my life. And also I wanted to share the happy times with my family, my husband Peter and my son Patrick. So first, the memoir goes by growing up, of course, in Ottawa, born in Montreal, but grew up in Ottawa, becoming an engineer, and then my Imperial College days, which were the best of my life, clinical engineering for almost 20 years, and then my international involvement. And of course, when I did my PhD, it was going to be a paper, but then I figured, no, that's a PhD thesis. So that was what that was. And then academia, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and women. Now, because in Toronto and Ottawa, young people ask a lot of important questions about the imposter syndrome and whether it affected me, and of course decide on what fights to take on to be visible in a male-dominated committee. And I was on many, the only woman on a committee. And I'll tell you a funny story about how to be visible, but how it didn't work out quite well. And then the Montreal massacre, of course, and now, which is very sad, is violence and femicide in Canada has become an epidemic. And that's not just in Canada, I'm sure elsewhere. So I was born in Montreal, so that tells you I'm just turned 83 years old. I moved to Ottawa when I was 7, when my father became the chief librarian of the Carnegie Library in Ottawa. I went mostly to private schools run by nuns, but some of them were very nasty, and my father and mother took me out, and in grade 5 to 8 put me in regular public schools in Vanier. It was ECU at the time. Of course, I always loved math and science. I didn't like the other subjects too much. And then, of course, I finished with my University of Ottawa degree in electrical engineering in 1966. But the book really tells you how I made that journey. It was not an easy journey, but it happened, and I was very happy to do that. I had summer jobs. The 62 was the gravity division in the experimental farm, my first science job. That was really interesting. And in 63, I really didn't have a job because they paid women less than men at Bell Canada in Montreal. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. You've got to pay me equal. And then in 64, I worked on the most interesting satellite communications project. And there's a lot of details about that in the book. And then my first engineering job, very boring, I'm sorry, but it was like in a telephone company, and they didn't have much work for young engineers. They just wanted you to be there so that if you have a patent, then they could have it. But then I applied right away, almost as soon as I got the job, for an Athlone Fellowship to study biomedical engineering at Imperial College. And of course, that worked really well. And then, of course, I was at Notre Dame Hospital after, sorry, so, oops. So after London, Peter and I, my husband, we moved to Montreal, and I was hired at Notre Dame Hospital for a clinical engineering position. That was a real one. That was amazing because in those days, there were so few clinical engineers, and we had to devise and define what our role was. And so, but I was with five physicists, and the head wasn't too happy about having an engineer, and things got a little bit more difficult after a time, and that's in my book. There were also two openings after 7 years of experience at Notre Dame, but they hired men who did not have any of the qualifications advertised. So again, this could have been a winning course in court, but I really didn't want to go that way. I mean, I thought, well, too bad, someday some research opportunity will come. And it did in Moncton in 1979 when I was named the chief biomedical engineer for 7 hospitals in New Brunswick. So that was really the opening for me. And so I worked there in Moncton and really built the place up. I mean, at first we had like $1 million of equipment, and when I left 10 years later, there was like over 40 million. And we had taken over at the end radiology, anesthetic machines, labs, everything. It was amazing. Um, so in 79, then, I really got this opening in the regional services in southeastern New Brunswick. But in 79, the it's called the International Federation of Medical Biological Engineering Task Force was created to develop clinical engineering in 30 countries that were affiliated societies to the federation. And Professor Aubry from Sweden, who was in charge, asked me, along with three other colleagues, to join this committee, and that was amazing. That's when my work began to be more international. And then, of course, I finished a doctoral thesis in August 1989. And of course, the UNB chair was opened and announced in May 1989. So by UNB announced it, and of course, it was going to start on December 11. But December 11 was the funeral in Montreal with 14 women Polytechnique massacre, but the funeral was 11 women of those 14. And I was given that position on, it was announced on November 8th that I had won the Nortel and Answer grant, and I would be the chair. But my first job, instead of being in office at UNB, I would be in the cathedral in Montreal. So this was all arranged by Wendy Robbins, the airfare to Montreal and way back. And on the way back, I had to speak to over 400 people in the Denis Auditorium. And it was so hard, to talk about what I saw, the funeral and all that. And I was so angry that these women were killed because they wanted to be engineers. And here I was, named to a chair that had to attract more women into engineering. It didn't make sense to me. So I said at the cathedral to Claudette McKay-Lassonde and Micheline Bouchard, very senior women engineers, I said 1,000 women for everyone who died. And then, of course, 10 years later, there were 15,000 more women engineers. Anyway, in February 1990, the Canadian Committee Women Engineers was created at Polytechnique, and I was appointed chair of this committee with 18 members. And it was led by the profession, the Professional Engineers of Canada, the Canadian Council for Professional Engineers, and also the Human Resource Department in the government. And then in 1996, I mean, I was alone to do the whole country. Can you imagine, 19 to 96, the whole country. I was in an airplane every 10 days, leaving from Fredericton to somewhere else in Canada, doing speeches and everything. And then finally, they created 5 regional chairs. And that was really incredible because that was going to provide some help that I wouldn't be the only one anymore. And I applied for the Ontario chair at that point, and Nortel supported us, and U Ottawa and Carleton won the grant. And then, of course, in the second chair, I saw the WISE chapter had been created. Well, Claudette McEllison in 1976 created the WISE, Women in Science Engineering Canadian organization. And there were chapters in several places, including Newfoundland and Ottawa. But the chapter had been kind of stagnating for a while because people who ran it were always the same people and they were kind of burned out. And so I resuscitated that and the Pathmakers. The Pathmakers was a program from the Ontario Ministry. I forget the name, but they created this Pathmaker program in 1986, I believe. And Ottawa was the only one that was resuscitated when I came. And we did a lot of work with girls from science and engineering faculties in our 2 universities who would go on to schools to, speak to girls about engineering and science careers. Then I did the Go Eng Girl with Maura McDill, who was a colleague at Carleton University. And then ONWE was created later. I am on Ontario Network of Women in Engineering in engineering. And so this, I created a kind of a newsletter that could go to deans and to student papers and to everyone. And that was quite successful, I think. Now, my research lab, when I left UNB to go to Ottawa, my lab grew from 3-4 students to about 20. And since 1992, I was doing artificial intelligence and machine learning applied to medicine. Of course, I mean, this was really early days of AI, and it was fascinating because it really worked really well. We could predict outcomes and resource utilization and everything. It was quite successful. And then, of course, I had a lot of publications. But the interesting point was somebody said to me one day, "You're the only person I know who had grants from the 4 councils, like NSERC, MRC, CFI, and SHRC." And I guess it's true because I did, work in different areas, like in the Women in Engineering. The grants were from SHRC, and then with my AI work was CFI, MRC, and NSERC. So it was really good. I really had a big struggle though to get my first grant. If you read my book, you'll see how I really almost failed. I mean, it was terrible. Always nil, nil, nil and I persisted and persisted until I got some money. And then, of course, it flowed forever until my retirement. And then I was able to do a lot of work with, I have 85 done theses. Some are undergraduate, 35 of them. The rest are master's and PhD. And all were defended successfully and I think led to good jobs for my students. So in one way, I was glad that the granting agencies finally helped me to help the students. And so over the years, I've done over 400 talks and media interviews and hundreds of schools. And, it was very, very busy. I created InWest because really ICWES had been an incredible. I should show you the book that Carl Deschênes and the historian Ruby Heap and I. This is an incredible book that was just published by Springer in just recently, like this January 2024, or sorry, December 2024. And it's all about how we created INWES, the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. I think that it still goes on really well. And then we created, Claire and I and Gail, the INWES Education Research Institute, because we wanted a charity organization to be able to do much more easier fundraising. But then we turned this into CWES, the Canadian Institute of Women Engineers and Scientists, in 2019. And my research programs were mainly AI in medicine, infrared imaging in medical applications, and here something is missing. Ethics, women, and wise, but also very much several papers on clinical engineering. So, because that was my life. I mean, clinical engineer, you're always a clinical engineer. Practicing retirement, I did that with my husband, Peter. We went to Florida for 10, 15 years, except for the COVID part. And it was amazing. Then I was able to see how I could write books and continue with students and continue to look into clinical engineering developments and continue to work with the Federation of Biomedical Engineering. And so in those periods, I wrote 8 books, and now I'm writing a sequel to my memoir. I have about 100,000 words done already, but these are more stories from Peter, my husband, and mine, and more about our personal life rather than the career, which is what I'm talking about today. Now, because been asked a lot of questions about this, I will tell everybody that, even I had an imposter syndrome. And people say, what? You're successful and everything and all these recognition. I said, yes, but you know what? Every time I was offered a new opportunity, like the job in Moncton or the position at UNB or applying for the joint chair or any of those, I said to my husband, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this, And he was so wonderful. He'd say, of course you can do it. You can learn anything and you'll do it. And so doubting skills and talents happens to a lot of women, maybe to a lot of men as well, but I'm not sure. But anyway, when it happens to women, then sometimes we don't take the opportunity that is offered to us. So in my case, it appeared when I had new opportunities, I'm not sure I can do this. And of course, I did take the challenge and I did manage it. And how you counter this, and I did that myself, is you tell yourself, yes, I can learn and I can do this. Believe in myself, believe in yourself. I think I can say that I've done that a lot myself. And then decisions on what to take on. There were a lot of issues when I started to do women in engineering. Like some people called women girls, and you take that on, every time somebody says something, or what do you take on? What potential fights? So I had to choose the ones that were more important and let others go. Those that would have more impact. But of course, also reacting to negative occurrences, I delayed the reaction by at least 24 hours. Sometimes I wrote a letter, right away, to respond, but I didn't send it. And I delayed my reaction. I slept on it. I know that's what they say. It's, this thing they always say, sleep on it. But it actually helps because the next day you can review carefully your response and assess the potential consequences of what you're going to do. And there are some things I sent anyway, and some things I didn't, because the impact would have been too negative. It wouldn't have really helped. So I think it's very important to reflect on all this, especially when you are fighting in a gender war and you really have to choose your battles very carefully. And how to be visible on a committee. Well, that one's funny because I always knew that I had to decide where to sit so that the chair could see me if I raise my hand and I want to make a comment. And if someone, and that happened quite a bit, that someone took my comment as his. So like Michael would say, oh, I think this is a really good idea, blah, blah, blah. But that was what I just said 2 minutes before him. But he took it as if it was his. So then I raised my hand and I said, well, I thanked Michael for agreeing with me and for thinking this is a good idea, just to make sure people knew this was my idea. Sometimes I took my glasses off and put them on the table just to be noticed, and I raised my hand. One time I was dressed in a red suit because I thought, gee, I'm going to be visible. This is all men, a NIAC meeting, National Innovation Advisory Committee or something. And the meeting and the chair was very sexist. And when he said, okay, John, say something, or David, or whatever, then when he came to me, he said, the woman in red. So, I had been visible, but it kind of backfired. And what I did is I said, well, my name is Monique Frize, and I would like to say this, just so that he would remember my name. But he still did it twice, Lady in Red and all that. But anyway, this was a committee I really did not enjoy. It was very difficult. People were almost, I would say, resentful that I was there making any comments. They wanted to be just the old boys club together. So you also, at a committee, always assess who are your allies and detractors. You always have some. And to have an impact, I prepared motions sometimes with the allies. I would say, well, we'd like to make a nice motion about this. Would you be able to support it? Like if I make the motion, could you second it? So if you have this already sorted out, because that's what a lot of men do, then you can have an impact and you can have motions before the meeting that really get tabled and discussed. So these are some of the points. Now, the Montreal massacre, that was a terrible, terrible thing. December 6th, around 5 p.m., this man walked in and he separated men and women and he killed 14 women. Why I'm asked to mention that in Toronto, for example, at my launch of my book, was because a lot of young people don't know. They were born way after. So 12 engineering students in their almost like last year, most of them, mechanical engineering, one nurse and one staff were murdered. The funeral was in December 11 in Montreal. And I said 1,000 women for everyone who died. I was so upset. Then Claudette Michaela-Son, who's a real wonderful leader of this cause of women in engineering in Canada, and she became the first woman, I think, president or the second of Professional Engineers Ontario. Anyway, she created the Memoirs Foundation where they give scholarships to women. And then, of course, the Canadian Committee with 29 recommendations, which could fix everything from birth to retirement. And in 2011, I wanted to see what's going on 20 years later. And at Ottawa University, we had our CWES, our Canadian Institute for Women Engineers, created this workshop. And 25 recommendations were done by 75 stakeholders from across the country, including deans and professors and students and women engineers. And so that was really wonderful. My last statement is that in Ontario, I saw that violence, I read CBC News every morning, and that violence to women and femicide have become an epidemic. And there are lots of numbers out there that you can look at. I think it's terrible because the massacre was part of the, femicide actually, but also now it's a lot of other women who live with very violent partners and they die. So I think that I'll leave this slide with the CMBS because you can see the memoirs can be accessed at this particular press. Also, their Amazon has secondhand copies. And The Bold and the Brave is actually my first book, which I was kind of proud of because it looked at a really almost 2,000 years of the history of women in science. And it took me 8 years to do that book while I was working. But during my sabbatical, I really had a lot of good time to write. But anyway, any one of you who want to write to me, mfrize@gmail.com, I'm always glad to answer questions now or later by email. So that's it. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frize, for your talk. I feel really inspired this morning by your career. And as someone who participated in many of the programs that you set up, specifically in Ottawa, for myself, I can really speak to your impact, just on me personally. And I can only imagine how many other people have also got to experience that. While we are waiting for some more questions to come in through the written Q&A feature here in Zoom, I wanted to ask you, what do you think set you apart from the other young women who came up around the same time as you?
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, well, you've had such a distinguished career, and I did so many firsts compared to the other young women of your class and your generation. What do you think set you apart or inspired you differently than those other women?
I guess that one of the main points was that I was in a male-dominated profession. Because, if the others, a lot of like in my schools, private school, grade 12, all the girls there, they became nurses, teachers, nuns, or married. And one went to social sciences university, CMBES, and I went to science. So I think that most women in my generation, they did not even imagine that they could do something like that. But I just wanted to be an engineer, So, and my parents were scared. I must tell you. I mean, the dean called my dad and said, can you make her change her mind? And he said, no, she's very stubborn, But I felt I was very assertive, and but no, that in my day there were very few, but there were some before me as well.
Yes.
A few.
Dr. Frize, I had a question as well. So I was just reflecting on your initial journey, where you had some sort of random, I guess you can call them random or not as applicable engineering positions right after you graduated. Then you got sort of that clinical engineering position, and then you went into research. So I was just thinking about that. So as a graduate of electrical engineering, you kind of got a job, quote unquote, in your field, which is electrical engineering, but it seemed like it didn't really stick, or you weren't too happy with it. And then all of a sudden this job in clinical engineering came, which is a bit more health focused, or biologically, I guess, focused. Um, did you find that transition easy, and something to your liking, or was it just something you're like, let's just take a look and see what comes out of it?
Actually, that's a very good question because when I left England after my MPhil and diploma of Imperial College, I came to Montreal and I looked maybe first at the University of Montreal, but it didn't go very well there because with a master's, you know, they wanted PhDs and stuff. And I did get a teaching position at Université du Québec à Montréal on biometry, biomedical instrumentation, stuff like that. But again, it didn't really offer me what I really wanted. And then when I spoke to this engineer at the Cardiology Institute, and he said, you know, there's a new job at Notre Dame Hospital in clinical engineering. And I was very excited. I tell you why, because at first I'm in a hospital and I'm looking at equipment. Some of it is dangerous, right? And I really look at all of it and I really make decisions on how to improve everything. And then new equipment comes in and in my lab, you know, I saw the light, for example, fell on an infant warmer and it could have killed the baby. And I really felt that I could make a difference, you know, with safe equipment and also for me to let the medical people and nursing staff know how to very best use this equipment. So for me, it was very fascinating. I love clinical engineering. And you know, even today, I'm retired many years now, I still feel myself a clinical engineer because I said to people when I left, a clinical engineer, always a clinical engineer. The biomedical research was fascinating and it was perhaps the most interesting part of my life, but still I feel that for impact, the clinical engineering was the most important part of my life.
Can I just tag on to that part as well? So now transitioning a little bit more into research, did you feel almost the goals you set out as a clinical engineer, such as this improvement component, such as making sure new types of technologies are safer, could you say that that could have only been achieved through research? Or is there,
Yeah, I could say that because in Notre Dame Hospital, when in 71, when I was hired, by 73, I realized there were a lot of electrosurgical burns. And I became one of the, I guess, international experts on electrosurgical burns. And with a few colleagues, we developed an electrode eventually that we patented, which would have helped. But of course, companies, because they were sued for this very bad burns, they were afraid to take on a new electrode. So we never managed to sell it. But at the same time, we did a lot of research that explained how burns happen. And to me, that was then I really loved research. I mean, from that point on, when university academia position opened, I said, oh my goodness, I mean, this is what I want to do. I want to do research, you know. But I also want to teach clinical engineering, which is what I did as a professor of biomedical. I didn't teach biomedical generally. I taught clinical engineering because I really felt, you know, that we need to train the next generation. And a lot of young engineers, young potential biomedical engineers took these courses and became clinical engineers. A lot of my students are clinical engineers today in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, in Africa, all over the world.
beautiful. That's awesome.
Just going to go to the written Q&A feature here. So from Natalie Boudreau, we have the question, your response, 1,000 female engineers for every woman who was killed, was a bold statement. How did you ensure that initial reaction statement was followed up by concrete actions to reach that goal?
Well, that's a lot in the book about the actions I took because the Canadian Committee as well And of course, all the speeches I did across the country, you know, thousands, really, well, 400 media interviews or 500, same with speeches. And then there were a lot of ambassadors. In each place I spoke, some people took over the message and continued the work in their area. So I think that overall, there was a lot of action done to make things better. Yeah.
Thank you. Two more questions here. They're quite similar, so I'm going to read both to you. So from Mario Ramirez, it was great to see your talk. Do you think that biomedical engineering has been a good profession to attract more women in engineering? It seems that most biomedical engineering programs have a good percentage of women. What can other engineering branches do to attract more women? And then from Matt Baratek, my observation is that biomedical engineering, and particularly clinical engineering, now has a much improved gender balance. Why do you think we have made so much progress compared to other engineering disciplines?
Well, I absolutely love those two men. I mean, we were good friends for many years, so thank you for being there. I think that, of course, biomedical engineering attracts more women than others, like, you know, straight mechanical or electrical. But if you can expand to other fields, I would think environmental also does really well with women. And also, I think it's called industrial engineering, I think has always done well with women. But I must say that biomedical and clinical engineering is very well suited for a clinical environment, where a lot of the you know, you go into a mine or you go into a plant of papers, you know, who makes paper. Uh, a lot of the top people are all men, right? But if you go into a hospital, a lot of the top people are women as well, you know, like the head nursing and all that. And so the environment is kind of more, I would say, easier. It's easier than if you go in a mine, a woman in a mine, or a woman in a plant, you know. Although I do wish women would go everywhere, but and Matt's question, that was the second one. Could you read that one again?
Yes. So my observation is that biomedical engineering, and particularly clinical engineering, now has a much improved gender balance. Why do you think we have made so much progress compared to the other disciplines?
I think it's because socially women are brought up to make a difference, to help the world, help society, help people. And so we see that right away. I mean, that's what attracted me to be a biomedical engineer, is I could see right away the help of people, the help of society. And so I think it's kind of more obvious. And you know what's so sad is a lot of little girls don't make the connection between helping society and becoming an engineer. And but I really want to say hello to Mario and to Matt. They were wonderful colleagues for a long time.
Thank you. Okay, a question from Elise Tremblay. When you were a clinical engineer at Notre Dame Hospital, how was the biomed department organized? On which projects did you work?
Yes, well, it was organized under a physicist who was in charge, with 5 physicists doing the radiology stuff, and just me, the only engineer. And my first project was to stop electrocution. So, you know, because of um, the the article that had come out in the Women's Journal, and that said that there were 1,000 electrocutions in the States every year in hospitals. And so everybody was kind of scared, and that was my first job. But then I do write in my book that, you know, the first job was okay. We did it. We checked every machine and everything, every equipment, and we took away the ones that were dangerous. But at the same time, this was really minimal compared to all the work that needed to be done by clinical engineers, which is the real management of technology. And so I developed this whole other aspects of my job as a single engineer there. But that was the fascinating part, you know. How do you make the whole system safe and effective? And how do you make sure that the people who use the technology, you know, I know one day one surgeon who was very tough. I mean, everybody's scared of him, and he asked me to go to the OR. He was trying a new machine and it didn't work well and everything, and he threw his instruments around, and oh, he was very angry. And I said to him, you know, well, you should have called me before, you know, you started. You, you know, and I could have told you how this thing works, and you know, and I'm sorry, but you know, that's why you're having a problem. And I went back to my office and I said to my boss, I said, well, maybe I'm not going to have a job anymore because I told him off, you know. He said, well, if you didn't, you could take your hat and leave, you know, because I really had done the right thing to tell him, you know, how he could have used the engineer to do this thing properly. And so it was a very interesting world. And when I started, we had to invent how to test medical equipment because now there's these testers and they do everything. But we invented everything. Like I invented many things that, you know, didn't exist. And how do you do this? Well, we'll find a way, you know. And so it was fun because you were more like a pioneer, you know, at the early stages of so 1970 on.
One more question from Natalie Boudreau. What core competencies do you most attribute your success in building up the biomedical engineering program in New Brunswick?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yes. What core competencies do you most attribute your success in building up the biomedical engineering program in New Brunswick?
Oh, okay. Very good question. I have a lot of that in my book, how I came out there and I was younger than some of the older technologists. And but I read a book called A Woman Manager. You know how you manage men that are older than you and all that. I did all that so I could be prepared. But what I did is I made sure that their competence was rewarded by keeping them in what they were good at. So Bob and Fred and you know and all the others, I was making sure that they could continue and not be thrown out, you know, into new ways that they'd have to learn a lot. But then I did provide training by companies. It was part of my specifications when we bought equipment that companies would train our people on the servicing of the equipment and also how to acquire spare parts and all that. So I think that was part of it. And we had weekly meetings where they could vent, you know, what problems they had with some nursing, you know, for example, some nurses could give them a hard time sometimes. Where's my machine? You know, why is it down there for 2 days or 3 days? And I was able to cope and help them and support them. And I always felt, and I told them every time that we met, that we were a team. I wasn't just a boss, we were a team. And in a team, we would do the best that we could. And we went from managing 1 million of technology to about 40 million when I left. And I thought, you know, I had a really good team there because they did believe that and they did support, you know, what I was trying to do. Yeah, and I supported them in their needs, you know. I really enjoyed that part. 10 years I was there. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I have
And
a
after
question.
Marianne, I have
Yes.
one after you.
So, Dr. Frize, I always admire your career because it spanned with different categories, academia, clinical engineering, outreach, and even international federation. What advice do you have for young women? Because a lot of young women are going into this field and are very aspired, and they might not know all the capabilities that clinical engineering can do and open up. What advice do you bring? I know you talk about the imposter syndrome and believe in yourself, but what advice do you have like to focus and grapple these kind of uncharted territories and minds that are available to explore in our field that's multidisciplinary?
That's an excellent question. I think that believe in yourself is the first thing I said to girls. I also said choose your spouse more carefully than your career if you want to have a career. And that's still true today. When you look at the recent CBC News, which said that women still take the brunt of the housework and child rearing. And I chose my husband the same way. My husband Peter, he spent 50% of the time with me, in housekeeping and child rearing. And so that was, part of it. But also, I think that women, more than men, have lower self confidence, And sometimes men have over self confidence, not all men, but some of them. I, met some of them where, they were you know, the best and the best. But I think we need to help women. Like in my lab, I think as a mentor, I was able to tell the women, you're great. You're going to be fine. And when one young student came to my office and she said, I don't know if I can do this, a master's degree. And she's got an average at Carleton of almost perfect, right? I think it's a 4.5 or something, 4.2. She was on almost perfect. So I said, well, you can close that door, and forget about it, or you can believe in yourself and do the master's and you're going to be great. And she did not only the master's, but the PhD with A marks, A levels, and then a postdoc. And she's got a great career. I think all my students that came into my lab, I had the same kind of approach. You can be better tomorrow than you were today. And you have to believe in yourself. So that's part. I had to do that to myself as well. I told you. I mean, not always believing that I could do all this, but I did because I said, you're going to do it. Just go. So I think it's a question of attitude, and and I think that you, Marie-Ange, you did a lot, to do a PhD and everything. I think you pushed yourself, which is great. And I think the young women, they could say, well, volunteer for stuff. I know that they have family and children maybe and other things, but if you volunteer like I did with the Federation, you really get plugged in, you really get to do things if you're in the right committees. And I think that's very important for their development, but also for the world to benefit from women's point of view. I don't know if it answers your question.
Oh, yes, you did. Thank you so much. Very appreciative.
Thank you.
One question I had, Dr. Frize, actually, well, I know there's a couple of questions on the chat, so Becky, why don't we ask Andrews first?
You know what? Oh, in the chat, right?
Yeah, in the chat,
I'm not seeing it. Here's Andrew's question. Yes, from Andrew Ivy. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Frize. My daughter just turned 9 and I see a budding engineer. She gets math. However, already lacks the confidence in this field. In your view, how can we as a profession work to support these precious early stages of engineering to ensure young girls continue in STEM?
That's a very good question, Andrew, and thank you for asking it. I think that your daughter could maybe participate in some of the engineering camps that they have, and the Go Inch Girl, because that gives them confidence that they can do an actual project, and you know, right to the point of it working, and it gives them not only confidence, but it shows how interesting it is. But also maybe they can read my book and see that they can all do this. I mean, you know, just get inspired by something, and she can also email me. I'd love to talk to her.
Maybe Adil, last
Yeah,
question.
maybe last question, and maybe we can summarize it at this point. So, Dr. Frize, when you started, you obviously, and throughout your distinguished career, you've seen, I guess, the advancements that women have made, and you've seen from a political standpoint violence taken against them. You've been in positions where you're the only one in a room full of men. So reflecting back, looking at sort of where you started, where we are now, and where we need to go. Um, do you maybe a simple question? Are you satisfied with the progress that's been made, and what else needs to be done?
You know, you've asked me the toughest question ever because who knows, is it enough? It's never enough, right? I think we can always do more, but it takes a lot of will from the political stakeholders, the people who hold the power strings. It really, and you know, and also there's backlash from some people who are worried about their own careers, you know, if they're young men or so. I think it's very difficult answer. I think that we need to reset, uh, sorry, reset and ask again another CCWE plus, you know, maybe 30. We need to look at what's going on. Where are still the issues? Why are they not moving in a, you know, positive direction? What is stopping it? But at the same time, maybe we need to recognize progress, and a lot of what the men and the women both have done to make it better, because there are some allies in both genders. And I think we need to look at that and say, okay, so use those ambassadors and let's look at the situation again. I need this. I think it's time to do that. 30 years after the massacre, you know.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can keep my slides. I mean, if anybody wants them, they can have them. And
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love to, yeah, if anyone would like, we can forward them on. That would be fantastic.
and the book has, of course, a lot of stories about my days, you know, with the different bosses I had and some of the issues I had. And, you know, it wasn't just a golden, you know, pathway. So I think it would be interesting if people, you know, look at the details.
For sure. So we just have 1 minute left in our webinar. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Frize, for your talk and answering all these questions for us. Before we leave for the day, just a reminder, our next webinar will be in February with our clinical engineering students, organized by Marie-Ange. So please take a look at the website and the bulletin to register and join for our next webinar. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Bonne soirée.